I'm Judith Leblein, and welcome to Conversations. On September 11, 2001, America took a terrible blow, of which we are still recovering at all different levels. But today's conversation is about the buildings themselves, the Twin Towers, and where did they come from? How were they built? And how did this building become the target of terrorism? And with me is Angus Kress Gillespie. He's the author of The Twin Towers, The Life of New York City's World Trade Center, but also locally voted Best American Teacher and a Professor of American Studies at Rutgers University. Welcome, Angus.
Thank you.
Boy, that's tough going, Best American Teacher.
Yeah.
If students think you're good, you must have it.
It's nice to have a following, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you had a love affair with the Twin Towers for quite some time. Before we start talking about the towers themselves, tell me when you first heard and what your first reaction was when the attack occurred.
Well, I was at home in New Brunswick, and I was sipping coffee and reading the home news, and I heard telephone ring. It was my older son, Neil, who was stuck in traffic on Easton Avenue, and he was listening to WCTC, and he heard that a small plane had crashed into the North Tower. So he phoned me up, and he urged me to turn on the television. I did, and I saw the flames and the smoke, and then I watched even as the second plane hit the South Tower. But that morning I had an appointment down in Princeton. I watched for a few minutes, but I mistakenly figured that the firemen would come, the fire would be put out, the Port Authority would repair the damage. It would probably take a year and a half, but the buildings would be restored and life would go on as usual. So
you had that kind of confidence in these towers.
Yeah, I thought they were built pretty strong. So I went down and kept my appointment in Princeton, and I started driving back to New Brunswick. It was around noon, and I heard on the radio that they had collapsed. Well, I really couldn't believe it. So I got home and picked up the telephone, and my answering service said, "You have 67 messages."
Everyone looking to talk with you about these buildings. Well, certainly our conversation today doesn't take away from the grief of the families or of America, but I really want to get into the towers themselves, and with time passing, I think we have the liberty now to talk even more about them. You mentioned the Port Authority. One of the big things that hasn't really been talked about for the layperson is who owned these buildings and where did they come from?
Well, the builder, the owner, the landlord was the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. But I must say, it's a fairly obscure fact. I remember in the early 90s when I was first starting on this project, since I have a captive audience at Rutgers 2 or 3 times a week, and students were interested in my project, I developed a sort of a rough survey, which I even formalized. I handed out, and the question was very simple: who is the builder, the owner, the landlord of the World Trade Center? And you have to bear in mind, I mean, these are all Jersey kids, so
right across the river, grew up with the image.
Yeah, you would think that they would know the answer. Not at all. I would say 98 out of 100 really did not know. Though, to the credit of Rutgers students, they seldom left it blank. They had very imaginative answers. They said it's a group of Japanese investors, the Rockefeller brothers. But very few people had the correct answer. It's sort of strange. You would think that the Port Authority, building the tallest building in New York City, would be so proud of it that they would somehow advertise that fact. But quite the contrary, they kept a very low profile. A lot of people didn't know that.
You know, when you think about government projects, you can almost understand why an undertaking of this size and magnitude might be kept low-key for fear of people saying, why should government be doing that?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the reason that most people didn't know and still don't know. I mean, all the gallons of ink that have been written about the Twin Towers, that point is seldom comes up.
Well, even following the attack, there were many interviews, and in particular, there was a new leasee, fairly new leasee of the 2 buildings, of the towers, an entrepreneur, real estate magnate in New York City, and I think that threw off a lot of people. In speaking of your students, an entire generation born and raised with these buildings up, what's been their reaction?
Well, it's hard to say, but you're onto something, I think, is people of a certain age, the older generation, their favorite skyscrapers were typically the Chrysler Building or the Empire State Building.
Mine is because of an affair to remember. I love that
yeah.
Empire State Building. Sleepless in Seattle, an old romantic. That's my building.
So for people of a certain age, they never did really quite accept the Twin Towers. There's a tendency to see them as boring and banal. But for my students at Rutgers, they never knew a time when there wasn't a Twin Towers. They grew up with it. And I think the younger people were more accepting of it. They didn't have this kind of gold standard of the Art Deco skyscrapers to compare it with.
You've just looked into my emotional issues. Once we've started to rebuild, to me, that Empire State Building, which as a child I learned all the facts about, looks lonely to me. Have you heard anybody say it looks so small and it looks so lonely? And I used to sort of not care for the other end of town, Lower Manhattan, and now I look there saying, did it really happen?
Yeah.
Do you have those moments?
Yeah, there are people who say, you look at Lower Manhattan now, it's so undistinguished. It looks like Detroit. It doesn't look special
I
anymore.
just flew out of Chicago this weekend, and I thought, I think they may have us beat now with an image.
Yeah, there always has been a rivalry between Chicago and New York.
Now, one of the interesting facts that comes out in your book, and you can't write a book that takes so much research without becoming intimately involved with a building. How is it that it wound up on the New York side of the Hudson if it was Port Authority of New York, New Jersey?
Well, Judith, that's an interesting question.
Real estate might have been cheaper across the Hudson.
I think this project was always going to be in Lower Manhattan, though originally it was supposed to be on the East River side. Eventually it got moved over to the west side. But you do raise an interesting point. The building basically was a deal cut behind closed doors by very powerful men. David Rockefeller wanted to stimulate growth in Lower Manhattan. Austin Tobin wanted to promote world trade to augment the traffic going through the Port of New York. These two powerful men come together. They pretty much decide that they want to have a World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. That's a given. Now, how to get it through the Port Authority? It's the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So the New Jersey commissioners, egged on by the governor, were saying, what's in it for us? And it didn't take long to figure out what needed to be done, because the pressing need in New Jersey was for restoring the commuter railroad. Specifically, the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad was really on the ropes. It was really in bad shape, and New Jersey wanted to revivify the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad. Of course, the Port Authority is reluctant to do this because everyone knows in this day and age, commuter railroads lose money. So, sort of, you might say, it was a quid pro quo. The Port Authority reluctantly agreed to take on responsibility for the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad in exchange for the privilege of going ahead and building the Twin Towers. And of course, the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad was subsequently renamed PATH, which stands for Port Authority Trans-Hudson.
Well, being the owner of the building, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a great many of their offices were there, and we've come to learn that since the tragedy in the loss of many of their employees. But it was really the World Trade Center, multiple countries involved in tenancy.
Well, certainly that was the original intention. It was part of the charter of the building, part of the rationale for building the building in the first place. The intention was that anyone who was a leaseholder in the Twin Towers was supposed to be engaged in world trade. So the original intent was that this would include importers, exporters, freight forwarders, custom house brokers, steamship companies, tugboat companies, and the like. That was the dream, that was the prospect, that was the charter. It never quite worked out that way. for a variety of reasons. A lot of the people engaged in import-export actually are very small companies, almost mom and pop.
This is pricey real estate.
Yeah. Well, that plus they didn't need that much office space. So as the Twin Towers became recognized as blue ribbon, Class A Manhattan real estate, really the market for that was mostly found in banks, insurance companies, stock brokerages, and they were willing to pay top dollar. So they had a tendency to squeeze out the small mom and pop import-export companies. So it never quite fulfilled the promise of becoming a true World Trade Center. But it's not anyone's fault exactly. There was something else at work, was the technology of office work was changing. When the buildings were designed in the 60s, it's really true that for import-export, it's a very paperwork-intensive business. And it did make sense to have everyone under one roof, shuffling these papers around. But what happened in the ensuing decades, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, is that inventions that we're all familiar with now, the fax machine, email, it's not as necessary any longer to have physical proximity to do business with someone. And so the raison d'etre of the Twin Towers sort of collapsed.
We're also hearing that since then, with so many displaced workers, many of them have gone into their homes and to smaller quarters, which brings up the next question. Being so intimately involved with this site, knowing the history, what do you see for that property?
Well, Judith, over the last few months, since the September 11th disaster, there's been a lot of proposals put on the table, but my reading of it is that all these proposals fall into one of four broad categories. The first is do nothing, turn the site into a monument, a memorial, a graveyard, really. A second proposal is rebuild the Twin Towers exactly as they were, tit for tat. A third proposal, rebuild the Twin Towers taller than ever. That'll teach the terrorists a lesson. And the fourth proposal, proposed by Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder.
Current leaseholder.
Yeah, is to build 4 towers of 55 stories each.
Now, speaking of this gentleman and his investment, it was really fairly recent that they became the new leasee. And I understand that just the process of trying to lease this building cost millions of dollars just to get your foot in the door to be a bidder. It must have been incredibly complicated.
Yes. Well, really what happened, I think, in the late 90s, it was a very peculiar set of circumstances. You had a Republican governor of New York, George Pataki, a Republican governor of New Jersey, Christie Whitman, and both of them were ideologically committed to the proposition that private business can do things better than government. And so the Port Authority was under enormous pressure to privatize its assets. And clearly, if the Port Authority is primarily a transportation agency, and if the Twin Towers is an office building, well, this is a prime target for
Seemed
privatization.
like an easy hit for privatization.
Myself, I was really opposed to this privatization of the Twin Towers. I don't necessarily agree that business always does things better than government. It may from time to time, but we have plenty of examples in New Jersey of the contrary. Look at automobile inspections. Look at, I don't know, Easy Pass.
Privatization has not always been the answer for us. If you're just joining us, with me is Angus Kress Gillespie. He's the author of Twin Towers, The Life of New York City's World Trade Center, and also a professor of American Studies at Rutgers University. Which leads me to my next question. How does a professor of American Studies become so enamored with buildings?
Well, it's very logical, actually, because when I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, one of the books that I greatly admired was a book by an American Studies professor, Alan Trachtenberg of Yale, and he wrote a book called Brooklyn Bridge, Fact and Symbol. And the idea was to take a work of civil engineering and tease it for its cultural implications. So he wrote about the Brooklyn Bridge, and he did talk about its engineering aspects, the fact that it's a suspension bridge, that the Roeblings were involved, and all of this. But he did more than that. He explained how it was an expression of Tammany Hall, of the Gilded Age, of the culture that produced it. So I was very impressed with that line of... Yeah.
Like an art symbolizes its era.
Right, right. I think almost like archaeology, only you don't have to dig on, this is above ground archaeology. We'll take an artifact, something made by humankind, and figure out, what does it tell us? What does this artifact speak to us about the civilization that produced it? So I always figured that that was a good way to do American Studies research, and indeed in 1989, along with my co-professor Michael Rockland, I wrote a book about the New Jersey Turnpike. It's called Looking for America on the New Jersey Turnpike.
There's an icon to American culture.
Sure, and then in 1999 I followed up with this book called Twin Towers. So in my mind, it's a very logical progression, you know, a bridge, a highway, a skyscraper.
So what did the Twin Towers say culturally about America?
Well, I think this is a difficult question. I was grappling with it in the introduction of my book. It shows American engineering know-how. It shows America reaching for the sky, American ambition. Because of its proximity to Wall Street, too, it represents American finance, American capitalism, and by extension, the entire American way of life, perhaps even America itself. I think it's very important. The terrorists, you know, terrorism is a weapon of the weak used against the strong. They don't have infinite resources. As it turned out, they really only had 2 targets. Well, maybe they had a third, we'll never know. But the 2 targets that we know for sure that were chosen was the Pentagon, the symbol of America's military might, and the Twin Towers, a symbol of America's financial might. I think terrorism is very much a war of symbols. They can't really beat us, but they can insult us. This is really like poking the giant in the eye or kicking the giant in the shins. It's a real insult. I think that's why we went to war.
I do think it's why there's such positive approval ratings on the war, because not only did you come into our homes, and for us in the metropolitan area, being felt even more keenly. As I travel around the country, as I'm sure you do, it sort of fingers out we are still rip-roaring mad here, whereas the rest of the country is starting to settle in to life. It surely brings out the point that buildings such as the Twin Towers, as the Pentagon, does have a cultural image.
Yeah, it's really three-dimensional poetry. A building is what it is and something else too. We can read it for its symbolic import.
Now, through the course of researching your book, I am sure that you had many conversations with the architectural team. How many architects does it take to finish a project like this?
Good question. Of course, ultimately, the Twin Towers are the responsibility of one man, Minoru Yamasaki, the Japanese-American architect with headquarters out in Michigan. But you might say, not to take away from what Yamasaki did, but it is a team effort. I mean, the lead architect is in effect the designer.
The outside shell that we've come to know.
But you know, there's many other people who are part of the team. For example, the structural engineer was Leslie Robertson. He's the one responsible for making sure the buildings stand up. And
we saw a great deal of him after the attack to explain how the building collapsed.
There are zillions of details, and many of these details are worked out by platoons of junior architects and engineers.
Just mind-boggling to me, absolutely amazing. I love to look at the organizational structure of things, and when you look at a building, you say, God, how did that happen? Well, certainly, the Pentagon and the Twin Towers being attacked is an attack on the American culture. How do you feel or think that Lower Manhattan will get another identity? Because only now do I realize how the people and the businesses of Lower Manhattan were so tied into the towers. Will they be lost for a while? When they rebuild, will it come back?
Well, it'll take a while to come back because with the loss of so much office space, obviously the surviving tenants had to scramble around to find alternate space. Many of them relocated to Midtown. Some of them have come over to New Jersey. And even if all that office space is replaced, it may take decades to get everybody back. It's a blow to the financial strength of Lower. It's a threat to the very idea of Lower Manhattan being a financial center.
Well, just recently, having been in Chicago, I still get a bit upset when I see huge, tall buildings, and I'm sure a lot of people share that with me. What is the largest building now in the United States? Is it the Sears Tower?
I believe it's the Sears Tower in Chicago.
And to your knowledge, have they changed their way of operations since this?
Yeah, I understand that they have made some changes. They put in those concrete planters, which are really vehicle barriers. They've tightened their identification checks and so on.
In doing the book, I'm curious, what are some of the things that stick in your mind as that you may say amazing or remarkable or interesting about the 24-hour life that happened in the Twin Towers?
Well, yeah, the last chapter of my book talks about the 24-hour cycle, the life of the Twin Towers. I always had this mental gymnastics exercise. What if you had a modern-day Robinson Crusoe, and you told this person, okay, you're going to have to spend 1 year of your life totally within the Twin Towers complex. How would this person have managed? Well, I think with enough resources, the person could have managed quite well. They could have taken up residence within the Marriott Hotel, and they could have pursued their career or their
plenty of meals.
Yeah, yeah.
Health club.
They could have pursued their career in an office. There were plenty of shopping in the mall. I guess human nature being what it is, eventually you would feel confined, but certainly it would be a silk-lined prison.
Many people aren't aware of the level of art that was in the building and since lost.
Well, that's another, typical government public policy controversy, and it's sort of a litmus test for your politics. Is it the proper role of government to subsidize the arts? That's a tough question. You can certainly make a good argument on either side.
Well,
I tend to think that it is the proper role of government to spend, but certainly I respect people on the other side of the aisle will say nothing doing. The government should butt out.
Easier said now as these same people book their trips to go to cities all around the world to look at the public art and quickly forget why they go to Florence or why they go to Rome or why people like you or I get excited about buildings. I'm always fascinated to ask an author, when did this passion start? As a young boy, did you like buildings? Were you fascinated with building?
That would be a romantic answer, but it's not true. No, I really think this is really more of an intellectual interest. If I hadn't gone to graduate school in American Studies and seen the work of Alan Trachtenberg, what he did with the Brooklyn Bridge, the idea might never have occurred to me.
Well, we'll have to have you back again to have some conversation about the New Jersey Turnpike, because certainly I spent an awful lot of time on it. Any thoughts about what's the next building that you might want to take a serious look at as an author?
I'm not sure I even want to do a building at all, because, the progression I told you before was a bridge, a highway, a skyscraper. Maybe next time I'll do a ship. It's just it's something different.
Well, if you haven't yet read it or had a chance, it's available in all the libraries here in Central Jersey and as well as the bookstores. It's called Twin Towers, The Life of New York City's World Trade Center. And unlike all the many books, and we do have a special collection here in East Brunswick, since September 11th, I found this so interesting to learn about many of the things I've only just started to hear about in recent months, and gives a whole new image to me of what the towers meant to us, and I do appreciate it. Angus Kress Gillespie, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
And remember, there's nothing like a good conversation. Join us again, won't you?